Hello, everyone. We are so privileged to have Juliet Hulse with us right now, and welcome to this is our last session. Juliet, no pressure. This is our very last session of the 24 hours of rare. But we're
Wow.
so privileged to have you. Juliet's experienced research nurse with specialist knowledge in cardiology, neurology, and emergency medical, with more than 15 years experience of delivering effective care. Juliet was director of research nursing at Illingworth for over 4 years before deciding to move to her current advocacy focused role. Juliet, welcome to 24 Hours of Rare. It's such a privilege to have you.
Thanks,
And
Jeff.
I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm Juliet Hulse. I am the Senior Director of Global Research Nurse Strategy and Patient Advocacy, a very long title, at Illingworth Research, part of Syneos Health. And I'm going to talk to you today predominantly about the patient centricity beyond the pandemic. So this is about what we've done in the past and what we're doing now and what we hope to be doing in the future. So basically around the fact that that's not just a COVID convenience. Patient centricity is something we like to look at in research trials and think of the patient as the center of the trial. So I need to talk today more about what's happened. Probably the last 12 months has been a really big learning curve for us. So 2020 threw the world into a global health crisis, and the likes of which has never really been experienced in living memory, and certainly not in my nursing career. So the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic rippled across the globe, and as we all know, it was felt country by country, with no region, it seems, untouched. So like every industry, this has had a significant impact in the research world, with projects being stalled and in some cases cancelled. And that had a really significant effect on participating subjects and also their families, because we have to remember it's not just about the patient, it's also about those families that take those patients through their research journey. So some of the challenges we faced, well, Illingworth, I don't know if anybody knows anything about Illingworth, but for many, many years, we have provided off-site research nurses that go into patients' home, and they can provide specialised research nurse care to those patients within their home. And challenges we found during lockdown were actually around the social distancing measures. They limited patients' access to clinical trials, and certainly patients that were supposed to be visiting departments suddenly realised that those departments actually might close due to the COVID pandemic, and also their access to those trials might be limited for lengthy periods, with staff being relocated to more acute settings such as ITU within hospitals. So the impact on this was huge for patients. So some patients are on very, very long-term studies that might last for many, many years. And finding a way that enabled studies to continue had to be found very, very quickly. So if you can imagine a genetic study where patients might be on a study for 5 years, or some of the long-term studies where patients might have infusions for 5 years plus, COVID restrictions through this situation was very, very difficult. So it caused sponsors to rethink the design of their current protocols to see if they could actually continue with these studies, but in the off-site setting. So there was new supporting regulatory guidance, encouraging the use of telemedicine and also remote visits. And this was approved globally. So both the EMA and the FDA offered supporting guidance, encouraging decentralization of studies. So for us, this meant that the mobile nurses in the pandemic had a very important role. Mobile research nursing models were to be tested to the full. And this meant that Illingworth alone received a 400% rise in the number of visits which were completed compared to the same period the year before. And this meant a huge, unprecedented boost in the number of requests for our services. Getting boots on the ground in the form of our capable GCP nurses was problematic at a time when staff were being recalled to hospital sites to go and work, as I said, in their intensive care units and an acute setting. So Illingworth instigated a new process to align with regional guidance on social distancing and personal protective equipment. And I know, listening to 24 Hours of Rare yesterday, there were quite a few questions that came up about research nurses moving in the community between houses. And we actually ring-fenced our nurses. So we ensured that the nurses that were working with us were not working on sites with COVID positive patients. So we knew that we were going to try and ensure that our nurses, with their absolutely full PPE, were able to go and see patients within the home confidently and ensure that their safety was a priority. At times, this was difficult. So our Italian and Spanish teams had to carry papers with them, which meant that where they were stopped at roadblocks, they would have to show the papers to say where they were going and what they were doing in the community, what they were working on, and who they were visiting. And also, this also meant for some of our nurses that visit patients in the community, maybe 5 or 6 hours from their homes, were having to think about their journeys very carefully. So they might have to think about where they could get a meal, where they could stop to use amenities. Some of our nurses will even stay overnight in hotels in normal situations to ensure they can reach their patients. But that had to be thought about again, because it's not possible when hospitals might have sites that are shut, but certainly for our nurses, there were hotels, petrol stations, restaurants that were shut, and they actually had to plan their visits extremely carefully. So a COVID task force was set up within Illingworth, and the team met probably twice a week at least initially to discuss regulatory challenges, difficulties in our nurses obtaining equipment, and IMP transport across border, and how we would maintain the safety of our nurses and also the patients during the pandemic. So the recruitment team were responsible for global resource and maintaining our nurse database during that COVID-19 outbreak, and a responsible task force was set up to meet the challenges. Without them, it would have been incredibly difficult to operationalize the team within the community. So the database was integrated within the strategy to ensure that global capacity was used to plan for segregation of our nurses as described, and help towards the wider COVID-19 response. So as I say, we ring-fenced those working on rare disease studies, and certainly paediatric rare disease studies became a priority, and studies where patients were especially vulnerable due to their indication, so that the risk of potential cross-infection could be managed. The team liaised with research nursing staff to ensure that supplies were getting through. That wasn't just PPE, that was things like lab kits could be distributed, and our nurses carry portable centrifuges and also ECG machines, so we had to ensure that we were able to get these to the nurses too, and that the correct health and safety measures were successfully implemented. So the pandemic has actually expedited the decentralization of trials. And this bringing together of cross-functional experts to enable accelerated rescue, I personally see as being a real bonus for a lot of our rare disease patients. So by using highly experienced GCP nurses to perform assessments off-site has freed up sites to focus on fundamental challenges that they themselves are facing. And establishing realistic timelines was critical, especially during a pandemic. So there are several variables that we need to address during the implementation of a study. Firstly, we need to think about regulatory approval. So does the protocol actually lend itself to off-site visits? And does it mention them? And does the consent form need to be changed to think about those patients that are going to be visited at home? We need to think about the IMP. Is there a pharmacy available, be it central or local? Are we able to transport the IMP? And what is the stability of that IMP? And will the IMP actually require mixing in the home? And some of our studies, maybe we can get the IMP to the patient within that 4-hour time frame. But if it's not stable beyond that, it would be better to actually transport it, and therefore the nurse mixes it actually at the home. We also need to think about patient safety. So not only maybe would the nurse wear an apron, but we need to think about maybe face goggles, a face mask, a face visor, and actually full PPE equipment. Do we need blood processing at the visit? So not only centrifuges, but maybe the issue of samples being transported across border, and also the level of complexity of visits. So we may have new requests for procedures which would not normally be done at site, but then we're actually being asked to do those visits. And it's now become quite clear that there's more being asked for us to complete in the home. So we need to think about the training considerations around that. So Illingworth like to think of themselves as a site outreach team. So we become an extension of that site team. And we're there to actually help the principal investigator community to focus on maybe the longer site visits that may involve the more complex procedures, such as a lumbar puncture or an MRI, and those small visits where maybe they're just doing safety labs or delivering an IMP can actually be managed by the Illingworth team off-site. So the ability to enhance the site's reach and make the study effective and convenient for patients is really important. So patients were able to be comforted. They could remain safe during the pandemic in their home, and that our nurses would be able to go out, as I say, and reach them there. And I think this highlighted the flexibility of off-site research nursing and what it can offer to trial design. So the next question is really about how the decentralized approach can be configured. So part of my role in Illingworth is to look at studies and to see what sites could be done off-site safely, and to also almost work with patients, families, advocacy groups to actually look at that schedule of assessments within the protocol and make suggestions about how we can make it perhaps easier for subjects and their families to have procedures done at home. And certainly, we deliver our nurses that when we've looked at a study, we can say we've done a risk assessment, we've looked at safety, we've looked at the drug, and we've looked at how we can minimize risk, and all round make this a good experience for the patient to take part in the research trial. So we really put this patient at the center of the whole trial and think about what it would be like for them taking part in a study. So one of the case studies that I'd like to talk about today is a study we did in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and it came to us as a problematic study where pediatric patients were required to attend weekly hospital visits over a period of several years. And the client approached Illingworth because the dropout of patients was really problematic. There was a high instance of dropout. This was predominantly due to not only travel requirements, so some of these patients lived many, many hours from site, but also for the families, there was loss of really normality within their lives, and the patient wasn't able to attend school. It was hugely inconvenient to the families, with both parents having loss of income earnings because they were frequently having to take time off. Illingworth stepped in and worked with the sponsor and a specific specialist logistics vendor who facilitated temperature controlled transport of both the IMP and samples from the patient. So the nature of the condition and the investigational product meant that additional safety measures were necessary. So we came on board. We ensured during the COVID pandemic, we added patient telephone calls to make sure that we were checking in on the family and the patient the day before. And we incorporated extra PPE and some reassurance to the family that our nurses were going to be able to visit them at home in that safe environment. So the resolution was that after amending the protocol to allow flexible off-site visits, Illingworth conducted, we were contracted to conduct the visits in the patient's home. And our research nurses visited the children in their homes 3 out of every 4 weeks for a 2-year treatment period. And it was found that after 2 years, not one child had dropped out of that study. The parents and their children were really delighted with the rapport that was built up with our team, and it meant that family life was less disrupted and the children could go to school again or college, and they could really get on with what they wanted to get on with, which is a little bit of normality. So after initiating the home research service and after 2 hours, there was a 0 dropout, optimizing retention of those patients. We've collated quite a lot of feedback from the patients, and this wasn't just the UK study, this was a global study, and we had a lot of gratitude and positivity around those off-site visits. Obviously, I could talk on this subject for a long, long time, and I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions about how we do actually operationalize the whole off-site research nursing capabilities. But what I'd just like to really finish up with is to talk about the future. So I think clearly we know the world has changed and we've got challenging times that remain ahead. I don't think, when we've had this pandemic, but I don't think we're going to have to learn to live with the pandemic and live with the changes that it's caused. And I think it can be seen positively, really, as a catalyst for change. So I hope the pandemic allows sponsors to actually be more comfortable with decentralized approach. And actually it becomes the new normal really. So enabling the legacy to be a truly patient-centric approach. I haven't touched on telemedicine, That's really another whole topic, but our nurses can obviously assist with the use of telemedicine. So we can be in the home, we could perhaps set up an area where the PI is able to speak to the patient with a research nurse present, just like at a clinic. And I think, that will perhaps become the new norm. Also, the use of wearables, the off-site research nurses assisting with that use of wearables, such as things like seizure tracking for parents, seizure tracking devices, app-based technologies. So even doing things like 6-minute walk tests with the help of off-site research nursing would be hugely beneficial. So a seismic shift in improving the patient experience is sometimes seen still as pioneering, but I think that over the next few years, we'll certainly see a huge shift towards this area. And as I say, I think the use of telemedicine will assist with that, and the use of technologies will certainly help. And I think patient advocacy and a drive from the patient community, certainly, so the backing of the patient community to be involved in the logistical design of studies, and that can mean the chances of study success are certainly optimized. So really, I think there's a very positive thing that has come out of the whole pandemic. And I think we have to think about changes and a change in basically the approach to clinical trials, certainly for patient benefit. So yeah, I'd just like to finish my talk with that. So any questions, I'm sure if you can possibly send them on, or certainly I'm sure Jeff or Eden would be delighted to be able to assist with that. Thank you.
Hi, Juliet. I apologize. I stepped away for just a second.
That's okay. No problem at all.
The end of the day with kids, you know how that can go.
Oh, yeah, I do.
All right. Listen, thank you so much for presenting this. I will make sure that you get a copy of the recording. And
great, thank you.
Thank you for your participation. 24 hours of rare. It meant so much to Eden and I that you.
No problem. And if there's any questions that come back in, don't hesitate to come back to me, will you? And just, send those questions towards me. Certainly decentralization questions, anything to do with offsite research nursing, send it my way.
All right. Thank you, Juliet. We will be in touch. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.